How's it going, guys? Winner Kills here, and welcome to a brand new and updated deck profile for Invoked Mekk-Knight. Yes, this is the first Invoked Mekk-Knight deck profile of 2020. Really excited as of late to bring this strategy back to the channel, as I've been messing around a bit with Shaddoll, of course in anticipation of the release of the new structure deck, which I am going to be putting together a pretty special video for that said release. But while messing around with Shaddolls, I got into mixing it with the Invoked engine, and then putting the Invoked engine, which kind of reminded me how much I actually enjoyed playing Invoked Mekk-Knight as a strategy. And this deck is pretty viable right now because of the recent ban list, sort of making this deck able to compete, as all the other better decks have gotten worse. So this deck definitely a bit more viable now, and still an extremely potent going second OTK strategy. So with that being said, I'm going to give you guys my updated list for February of 2020. And before we get started, if you're interested in the sleeves that I'm using here on my extra deck or main deck, these are the Imperium Armor sleeves. Their new formula here. Absolutely incredible sleeves for tournament play. Highly durable, amazing shuffle, really solid sleeves, and this beautiful playmat here. Two-sided, two-player cloth playmat. Amazing. If you guys are interested in picking up these sleeves, this playmat, or hell, if you're even interested in picking up a new deck box, they've got a brand new deck box that they just released over on their website, and you can get all of that stuff for 10% off using my discount code WinnerKills10off. And if you're buying anything off of TCG Player, don't forget to use my affiliate link down in the description below. So of course we'll get right into the deck profile, and we'll start with the monsters. Of course, 3 Alistair the Invoker, 3 Mekk-Knight Purple Nightfall, followed by 2 Mekk-Knight Blue Sky, and lastly for the Mekk-Knights, 1 Mekk-Knight Indigo Eclipse. Then onto the hand traps, we have 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, 3 copies of Psy-Frame Gear Gamma, and 1 Psy-Frame Driver. Then we have 2 copies of Gamma Seal the Sea Turtle Kaiju, 1 copy of Gizmek Kaku the Supreme Shining Sky Stag. We'll talk about this card later. Then we have 1 copy of Dino Wrestler Pankratops, and 1 Trickstar Korobane, and 1 Trickstar Candina. And that rounds out all of the monsters in the main. Moving on to the spells, we have 3 copies of the Magical Meltdown, 3 copies of Invocation, 2 copies of Pot of Desires, then 2 copies of Mind Control, 1 copy of Lightning Storm. I actually pulled this and the Gizmek in a pack, or in a box the other day, so lucky me, right? Then 1 Lightning Storm, 1 Trickstar Light Stage, 1 Terraforming. That is it for the spells. And then into the traps, we have 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence, but wait, those aren't the only 3 traps I'm playing in the main deck. I'm also playing 2 copies of Crackdown as well. Again, more on that later. So that is it for the main deck. Now we'll jump into the extra deck real fast. We'll start with the Link monsters, the good old blue cards. We have 1 Borrelsword Dragon, 1 Mekk-Knight Crusadia Avermax, 1 Blackluster Soldier, Soldier of Chaos, 1 Nightmare Unicorn, 1 Alistair the Invoker of Madness, 1 Psy-Frame Lord Lambda, 1 Cross Sheep, 1 Secure Gardener, and 1 Almirage, of course for, Alistair shenanigans. For our fusions, we have 2 Invoked Mekaba, 1 Invoked Purgatrio, 1 Invoked Raijin, 1 Invoked Kalga, and the Ixies monster that I'm playing is 1 copy of Dingirsu, the Orcus of the Evening Star. So that is it for the full main and extra deck profile. Now we're going to go ahead and take a deeper look at what all the cards do in this deck, their actual purpose, their function, and we're going to talk about the card rules, the breakdown of the whole deck. Okay, so here we have laid out the starter cards for the deck. Basically, these are the cards that get our engine going, have easy activation requirements, things of that nature. We want anywhere between 11 and 14 of these cards. Ideally, of course, some decks will vary, but that is just a sort of a standard number to go off of. So the first card we have here is Alistair the Invoker. Of course, you've got to play 3 Alistair. Searches out your invocation, also has the ability to boost up any fusion by discarding it by 1,000 attack and defense. So it does offer built-in protection, sort of as like a hand trap for your fusion monsters. But this card solely allows you to basically put on a lot of pressure, whether it be your fusion summoning for the Mekaba to provide negation in the form of spells, traps, and monsters, or you're going into a card like Purgatrio to try to go for a game. You also have cards like Raijin that can promote disruption as well, and cards like Caliga that promote more of a floodgate type aspect of play. Alistair's that card that gets you that fusion spell that allows you to get into those powerful monsters that we have access to in our extra deck. So this card, 100% a 3 of, definitely a starter card. Any kind of hand that starts with this card usually ends on a somewhat decent board, especially for going second. Then we have 3 Mekk-Knight Purple Nightfall. I could not put Blue Sky as a starter card, specifically because you can only resolve his search effect if your opponent has any cards in play, and if you do have to go first, that card is pretty much useless unless you're playing a card like Nightmare Corruptor Ibli. However, Purple Nightfall can be activated as effect to search during your turn to search out more Mekk-Knights, to get that Mekk-Knight engine going, to constantly get this guy recurring to your field during every standby phase, as a recurring, 2500 body that can search you a new Mekk-Knight every turn. So yeah, it's a great card all around. Gets you an Indigo, just for link fodder, for possible rank 8 play, whatever it may be. This card is fantastic for that. Very easy to set up as well. You just need 2 cards in the same column, and a zone, of course, to special summon him into. So with cards like Alistair being able to link into the Almirage, and setting a card, you can see how easily you get Purple Nightfall on the board turn 1. Next up, we have Triple Magical Meltdown, the field spell that makes this deck so powerful. This basically on activation searches you your Alistair, which then searches you your Invocation, and then from there you're in business. But it also has the ability, to add in some protection to your fusion summoning and your fusion monsters. It says the activation of your cards and effects that include an effect that fusion summon a fusion monster cannot be negated. Also, your opponent's cards and effects cannot be activated when a fusion monster is summoned this way. So Magical Meltdown, hands down, is still an insane field spell and definitely should be played in here at 3. Seeing this card not only guarantees your Alistair for further plays, but it also guarantees that your fusion spell is going to go through. Next up, we have 2 Pot of Desires. This deck can be a little bit inconsistent sometimes by, the fact that you really kind of get the perfect balance of both of these engines coming together, the engines of the Invoked engine and the Mekk-Knight engine. So simply having a card like Desires to give you a chance to see, into more cards in your deck is pretty nice. Of course, this card is cross-roll capable. It could be a superior extender. It could be an additional extender. I like to put it as the role of a starter card in here just because draw power is something that this deck does need. And then, of course, lastly, the 1 of Terraforming. This gets you into this, which gets you into this, which gets you into your Invocation. And then from there, you're on your way. So those are all the cards that I have labeled for starter cards for this deck. Now we'll go ahead and take a look at the superior extenders. So here we have laid out the superior extenders for the deck. These are cards that help add on to our original starting plays, and make them a bit better. They have a little bit heavier activation requirements in some cases, but not all. And yeah, they just help add on to our starting plays. Now, some of these cards could cross between roles, could be starter cards themselves or additional extenders, things like that, or even removal cards in some cases, again, like this card down here. Or even this card, but again, they serve multiple roles, which is fine because it makes our deck a bit more versatile. But looking here at the Mekk-Knight of the Blue Sky, this card, like I said earlier, I could not label this as a starter card, specifically because the fact that this card isn't really that useful going first, because you actually cannot resolve its search effect, because it can only search Mekk-Knights up to the number of cards in your opponent's column. So of course, if you're going first, your opponent won't have anything in their on their field yet for you to be able to take advantage of his effect. So going first, definitely more of a superior or even additional extender, but going second, this card easily can become a starter card. Perhaps if your opponent doesn't play around Mekk-Knights to begin with, you can drop this guy onto the field and search out a Indigo and a purple right off the bat, and right there you're already really far ahead. You've gotten a body on board and searched 2 cards in the process, and they might even force out an Ash or an Impermanence on it, and at that point your Alistair can probably go through a little bit easier. And then we have Mekk-Knight Indigo Eclipse. This again is just another body. We're not playing too many of the other really great Mekk-Knight oriented strategy cards in this deck. As we load in like a pure Mekk-Knight deck, which by the way I still enjoy much more than an Invoked Mekk-Knight deck, but I still do like my Invoked Mekk-Knights here and there. But Indigo Eclipse basically can move a Mekk-Knight you control into another column, and it is a once per turn. Not a hard once per turn, but can be pretty unique to slide him around to be able to open up more room for other Mekk-Knight plays. Per se, you only have access to one column. You know, you can go purple. Purple can search a blue. And then you can summon an Indigo in your hand or whatever, and then Indigo move over to so you can summon out the blue and get another search for next turn. And then you've already gotten 2 bodies on the field. So this guy is a searchable extender that can also make room for more extending. So I really do like this card. And it's a level 8 light as well. Next, we have the Trickstar package. This is something I'm still like new to. I don't know if I'll continue to play this package going forward. If I were to drop it, I'd probably replace it with maybe more hand traps or something like that. But in theory, these cards do help you just get to link fodder really fast. They are light monsters in and of themselves, and light monsters are great with this deck, especially when paired with Invocation, because we need light targets to get into Mekaba. So, and even going first, this card and this whole engine really can help get you into Invoker of Madness to be able to search Invocation, to be able to end on you know, multiple Mekabas. So this engine is really great for that. Yeah, because when this card is normal summon, you can add a Trickstar card from your deck, and then if you control no monsters or all monsters you control are Trickstar monsters, you can just special summon the Corbane from your hand. And then of course Light Stage searches out any Trickstar card and can also lock down a back row for a turn as well, so good for removal. Again, this could be a starter card as well if you're trying to just get into some link fodder. Same thing with a Candina, same thing with a Corbane. These 3 cards here could all be potential starter cards. Next up, we have the Gizmek Kaku, this Supreme Shining Sky Stag. The reason why I have this card in here at all as a card to even begin playing in this deck is simply because it's such a very strong going second card. Basically, for those of you who don't know what it does, if a monster is in the extra monster zone, you can special summon this card from your hand, and then you can target one face-up monster in the extra monster zone. Equip that face-up monster to this card. Maximum 1. When this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can special summon one of your monster cards equipped to this card. You can only use each effective Gizmek Kaku, the Supreme Shining Sky Stag, once per turn. So this card is insane for going second. You just summon it on the field and basically mind control or Thousand Eyes restrict something, and then it can attack. If it destroys a monster by battle, at that point you get to special summon whatever card you took with this card. It's also a fire monster, so you can use it for Purgatrio fuel if need be. And I only have one right now, so that's why I'm only playing one. If I had multiples of these, I might play another one and perhaps maybe cut some other cards in the main deck. But right now, I think honestly one is okay. Ideally, there would be more, but you know, you got to work with what you have. Then we have 3 copies of Invocation. Also, this isn't necessary. If you wanted to drop this for, per se, a Red Moon, that's something you could easily do. And then 3 Invocation. Definitely hands down, you know, the pinnacle of a superior starter, or not superior starter, but superior extender card in this deck, rather. Simply because it allows you to fusion using your Alistair and then any attribute in either grave. And this card is not a once per turn. As far as its fusion summoning effect is concerned, you can fusion summon as many times as you have invocations in your hand. And then, of course, the recycling effect to put this card back into the deck from the grave, and then add back an Alistair the Invoker from your hand to, or from your banished zone to your hand. So these 3 cards are great. And then, of course, the Light Stage, we already talked about it, can get the whole Trickstar engine going, get you light fodder, get you link fodder, and also have potentially the ability to lock down some back row. So now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the very few additional extenders we have for this deck. So these 2 cards, again, are additional extenders. These cards are, like, this deck is very weird in that it has very little additional extenders, and additional extenders, of course, are just cards that, of course, add on even further to our plays that we've already established and have even harder activation requirements, and add even further to the power level of our plays. Gizmek Kaku being one of those, and, you know, sort of Indigo Eclipse, not the greatest effect to resolve on its own, but just getting another body on board, essentially allowing you to do what this deck wants to do. And basically, this deck doesn't really have a set thing in mind. Obviously, it wants to OTK, but the way it does that isn't really set in stone. It's get a lot of bodies on the field, possibly link into cards like Avermax and Borrelsword, and just swing for game. No matter which way you do that, that's really what this deck wants to do, is just attack for game. And how do you do that? You get a lot of monsters on field. So now we're going to take a look at the responsive defense cards that we have for this deck, and we have a little bit of them. So now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the responsive defense cards. So here we have our responsive defense cards, and basically what responsive defense is, they have to be activated in response to a specific thing that our opponent is doing. We can't just activate them whenever we would like. For example, a card like Infinite Impermanence does not have to be activated when your opponent activates an effect. Cards like Ash Blossom, Joyous Spring, and Psyframe Gear Gamma do have to be activated. We can only activate these cards when monster effects are being activated to be able to negate, or when a card is being sent from the deck to the graveyard, added from the deck to the hand, or specialed from the deck to the field. So these cards, while it is a broad scale of things that they can sort of stop, monster effects period, manipulating the deck in certain ways, these cards do have to be activated though in a certain window, and you can only respond in a certain window with these cards. So that makes them a little less flexible, but they're still very great cards nonetheless, especially for this format, so definitely want to play these. And also to mention that these cards are fire and light attributes, so we can use them to further enhance our fusion summoning capabilities. Next up, we have the Chainable Defense category, and this deck, as you might have imagined, has a lot of defensive cards because we want to slow our opponent down as much as possible if they go first, because our strategy is to go second, blind second, and OTK as fast as possible. And again, the difference between Chainable Defense and Responsive Defense, as we talked about, your responsive defense has to be activated within a certain window. Chainable defense can be activated whenever. For example, a card like Infinite Impermanence does not have to be activated when a monster effect is being activated. We can simply just use it whenever to negate an effect. We can also set this card if need be, if we have to go first, to be able to negate a monster effect and possibly an additional spell or trap if it was activated in the same column as this. And then we have 2 Crackdown. The reason why I'm playing the 2 Crackdown in here is because I don't like this deck for one reason, and the one reason I don't like this deck as much as pure Mekk-Knight is I feel like it has a very weak and hard time going first. So I wanted to play some more traps in here that weren't just Infinite Impermanence or cards like Evenly Matched, because those just make you lose a little harder when you are forced to go first, which may be unlikely, but it's still not impossible. So a card like Crackdown I do really like, and again, it can be activated at any given point so long as your opponent has a monster for you to basically snatch steal. And this card can also set up columns for your Mekk-Knight plays as well, so I do really like the idea of Crackdown, although not necessary in the main deck. Could be replaced with cards like Evenly Matched if you wanted to go that route, or Cosmic Cyclones. Then 1 Dino Wrestler Pankratops. This card you could argue is an additional extender because it is a body, rather large body, that can get on the field very easily. Simply your opponent has more monsters than you do, and again, its pop effect can be activated whenever, does not have to be activated directly in response to something. So that is it for our Chainable Defense. Again, in theory, I do really like the idea of just teching the 2 Crackdown in the the trap lineup. Just gives the deck a bit more of a chance if it does have to go first, and or even if you aren't able to OTK, that card can sort of be a bit of a saving grace in of its own right. So now we're going to take a look at removal. So here I have laid out all the removal cards for this deck, and one thing you may have noticed, this deck doesn't have any searchable in-engine removal cards, and for example, those cards might be Mekk-Knight of the Red Moon and Mekk-Knight Yellow Star. Of course, those are searchable cards within our engine, our Mekk-Knight engine, that we can use to remove cards, but we're not playing those just because they can be a bit bricky at times, and oftentimes playing more generic removal like this can be a bit better. Now, Gamma Seal is fantastic. Not only does it clear problem cards off of our opponent's field, but it gives us the opportunity to place it in whatever column we want. For say if they have a back row in a column that isn't in the same column that their monster was originally in, we can take this Gamma Seal and drop it in that column that their back row is, and then open up, a free column essentially to summon our Mekk-Knights in. So Gamma Seal is great for that, serves multiple roles essentially, setting up plays and removing cards. Mind Control can only play 2 now, but 2 is fine, 2 will do. It can be a card that can also be set, summon a Mekk-Knight in, and then flip up to be able to take a card to be able to link with or to bait out an interruption. And then one of Lightning Storm. Of course, in a going second deck, I feel like this is kind of mandatory. I feel like if you have any copies of this card, you should play it in this deck at whatever amount of copies you have. I only currently have one, so I'm just playing it, and I wanted to show it off in a deck profile since I did pull it the other week. But again, you don't have to play this card. I realize it's very expensive and can be replaced with cards like Twin Twister or Cosmic Cyclone, or other hand traps like DD Crow, Effect Veiler, Forbidden Chalice, whatever you want. So that is it for all of the removal that we have in the deck, spell trap and monster removal. And the last card in here is our engine requirement, and that is unfortunately the Psy-Frame Driver. This card will probably troll several hands of mine in the future, but you know, you kind of got to play it. It's a necessary evil within the deck that allows you to use your gammas, which is great. It's also a light, so if you do brick this card, you can use it for fusion fodder if need be. Okay, so for our fusion monsters now, as we dive into the extra deck here, basically we have these 5 fusions. I know some builds have playing 3 mecha, but I've still to this day, over the many years I've been playing Invoked, have never ever wanted a 3rd Mekaba. Maybe someday that will change, but I don't know, it looks unlikely at this point. But Mekaba's sole purpose in this deck is to provide some interruption for this deck, because if you do have to go first, you don't want to just be a sitting duck. You want to have some way to interact with your opponent, and Mekaba is just the card to do that. Alistair allows us to search out that fusion spell. We need Alistair the Evoker and a light monster to get to this card, so that is why we play a Mekk-Knight engine, the Psy-Frame engine, the Trickstar engine, giving us plenty of light fodder to be able to get into this card as soon as possible, because then it can help secure our other plays to go through and potentially stop our opponent from being able to play at certain points as well. Purgatrio. This card is fantastic. It requires a fire monster, but again, we have cards like Ash Blossom, Almirage, Gizmek Kaku, Ash Blossoms in our opponent's graveyard, whatever it may be. And this card gains 200 attack for every card on your opponent's side of the field, and it does piercing damage, and it can attack all monsters your opponent controls once each. So this card essentially mass removal in the battle phase, and sometimes can secure the game. Then next up we have the Invoked Ragin. With a lot of people playing Droll and Lockbird this format, a lot of times you can get easy access to Invoked Ragin by banishing a Droll and Lock out of their graveyard, and then you get yourself a free Book of Moon onto the board that can act as an interruption if need be. And then the last fusion, a fusion that has gained a lot of popularity in Invoked over the past several months to a year, is the Caliga. It takes a dark monster plus, of course, your Alistair the Invoker, and then its effect basically is very, very floodgatey, and that's essentially what this card exists to do, is just to floodgate the opponent. If a player's monster effect attempts to activate, none of that player's monsters can activate their effects for the rest of this turn. While this card is face up in the field, each player can attack with only 1 monster during each battle phase. So it slows everything down. That's essentially what this card is meant to do. If at all possible, you know, being able to get to a Mekaba and a Caliga is very, very strong, because you can negate their one effect that they try to activate, and then they can only attack with 1 monster. And if you have an Alistair and the Invoker in hand, you can sort of protect this in the battle phase by being able to boost this defense up to 2,800, which is going to be very hard for them to get over in some cases. And then on to the Xyz, 1 Dingirsu. A lot of times you have sort of backed up plays with some Mekk-Knights, you know, cards like Purple and Indigo, and really not much to link off into at some point. So being able to have the opportunity to overlay into this guy is fantastic. You know, non-targeting removal and also provide protection to all of your stuff is absolutely amazing. So I do really love Dingirsu in the extra deck. Then we have Borosword, of course, going for the OTK. Avermax can put a lot of damage on, but also play the defensive game if need be, and some decks outright just can't get rid of this card. Unicorn for removal. Blackluster Soldier, again, same thing, removal for getting rid of cards that cannot be targeted. So for say if we can't get to this, we can get to this very easily because we play a lot of Mekk-Knights, which are level 7 or higher. Then we have the one Alistair the Invoker of Madness. This card can basically, if something is fusion summoned to the zone it points to, you can basically discard a card to either add the Book of Law or Invocation from your deck to your hand. So just allows you to, once you make a fusion, search out another fusion, and then just continue your plays even more. And it's very easy to get into. 2 monsters with different types and different attributes. Psy-Frame Lord Lambda, a lot of synergy with this card in this deck since we do play some Psychics, those being the Mekk-Knights. So you can link into this card pretty easily turn 1 and banish a purple to search out a Gamma in the end phase, you know, be able to end on Gamma, Mekaba possibly, to be able to provide multiple negates during your turn, and then is of course turning on your Psy-Frames. Cross Sheep is fantastic in here, again, turning any 2 monsters into a monster reborn, essentially. You know, you fusion summon to the zone it points to and revive anything to be able to help link up into cards like Borrelsword or Avermax, 1 Almirage, and 1 Secure Gardener. These two actually go hand in hand. I wasn't too keen on playing these two together, but I realized it turns Alistair into basically a 1-card, you know, Mekk-Knight completely on its own, which is fantastic. And if you have another light with it in your hand with that Alistair, you know, it could potentially turn even into some cases 2 Mekk-Knight if you have, you know, the extra resources to do so. But again, the way that works is you normally Alistair search Invocation, link off into this, and then link off the Almirage into this, and then you have your light, you have your Alistair, and then you banish this in the Alistair, and then you get yourself a Mekk-Knight on the field with 1 monster negate right then and there. But if you have more resources, you know, you can make your first Mekk-Knight here, use this to get it off the field, or just link into this, and then, you know, make the other Mekk-Knight up here, wherever you might need to do that. So these two cards are really great. They go hand in hand. I was thinking about Gravity Controller, but I don't really feel like there's much room in here or much of a point to go for Gravity Controller. I would probably play that in more of a Shaddoll-oriented build, because, you know, linking off a Construct or a Winda to get back a Fusion is very, very nice, or to get to back any of your Shaddoll spell or traps. I really do like that, but not personally in here for the time being. So that's it for the whole main and extra deck breakdown. We'll talk about the side deck real quick. Typical things that I might side deck out. Could be the cards like Lightning Storm. Could easily be cards like Crackdown. Those could easily get sided out. You could easily side out the Gizmek Kaku, or whatever other cards you're playing in place of these cards. Things that I ideally wouldn't side out, though, are your main, you know, Mekk-Knight engine, your Alistair engine, obviously, you know, the Invoked engine, things like that. Mind Controls could easily go out of the main deck, or even just one of them if you had to choose. Again, 1 or 2 of the Gamma Seals if you might be fearing that you're going to go first in a deck like this. You could look to side out possibly an Impermanence or a Pankratops, depending on the matchup. Yeah, so quite a bit of room in here. You'd even side out 1 Invocation as well, since you don't really need 3. I'm not too keen on 3, but since I am playing Desires, I figured it would make sense to at least play 3 Desires, or 3 Invocation in the main deck. So quite a bit of room there in the main deck to be able to side deck some things out. You know, fit maybe possibly 6 to 7 side deck cards within there. So yeah, that's going to do it for this updated Invoked Mekk-Knight deck profile. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you think down in the description below. Again, this is just a template for you guys to go off of and to, you know, help improve hopefully your own Invoked Mekk-Knight decks. Looking forward to giving this deck a bit more playtime going forward. If you guys want to see test hands for this deck, let me know down in the comments below. It is a going second deck, so doing test hands with going second decks can be a little complicated sometimes in determining, you know, hypotheticals, you know, what the opponent might have, and determining how to properly play in a video like that. So let me know if you guys want to see some test hands for the old Invoked Mekk-Knight deck, and see how consistent the build can be in some situations. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching. As always, Winterkill signing out. We'll see you guys in the next one.